ENGin really tries to help unlock the language barrier for Ukrainians in a very authentic conversational setting by connecting them one-on-one with English-speaking volunteers all around the world. And they chat for just 1 hour a week, but it really makes a huge difference because it's that one-on-one context where you can't hide, you have to talk, plus you're participating in cultural exchange, you're sharing your culture and learning about your conversation partner's culture, and oftentimes you form a really close bond.
You're listening to the Speaking Tongues podcast. I'm your host, El Charisse. Each week, I sit down to a conversation with multilinguals where we discuss and celebrate language, life, and culture through our own perspectives. Welcome back to another episode of Speaking Tongues. I am your host, El Charisse, and I'm here today with my guest, Katerina. Katerina Manoff is the founder and CEO of ENGin, a global nonprofit that has paired over 50,000 English learners and volunteers for online conversation practice and cultural exchange. Prior to starting ENGin in 2020, Katerina spent a decade working in the education space, where she helped launch multiple nonprofit and for-profit initiatives. Katerina began her career as an investment banker at Evercore Partners. She holds a master's in education from Harvard University and a bachelor's degree in international studies and business from the University of Pennsylvania. Katerina is also a mom of 2 young girls and enjoys writing in her free time. I'm so happy to welcome you to Speaking Tongues today. Katerina, how are you?
I'm great. So happy to be here.
This is going to be such a great conversation, and I'm really looking forward to learning more about your languages, about you, about your work. And I'd like to start each episode with the same question, which is, what is your first language and which languages have you learned to speak?
Sure. So I actually grew up speaking both Russian and Ukrainian. They're my 2 native languages. And then I learned to speak English as a child and learned Spanish when I was a little older.
Yeah, so you grew up in Ukraine.
I was born in Kyiv, yes, and I immigrated to the States when I was 8.
Oh, wow. Okay, so you heard Russian and Ukrainian both in your home, like interchangeably or in your community, and tell us a bit about
Yeah.
that.
So my mom spoke to me in Russian and my dad spoke to me in Ukrainian growing up. So it was very much for me associated, this is dad's language and this is mom's language. And I didn't go to preschool or daycare. So it was really, I think I was growing up in the family, hearing these 2 languages. And when I would go into the community, I would hear both as well. So I think I kind of grew up with this idea, well, everyone has their language, so mom has Russian and dad has Ukrainian. And I get to speak both.
Are there any noticeable differences that you've noticed as you're a speaker of both, or, even when growing up, differences or similarities between the two?
Yeah, I would say Russian and Ukrainian are, since they're in the same family, there's something like Spanish and Portuguese, where they're definitely 2 clear languages, but there are common roots. So some words are going to be the same or very similar, and then some words are going to be completely different. And so I grew up with this idea of sort of brotherly languages, right? So all family, my family, and then the bigger language family of Slavic languages, and definitely saw the connections between the 2.
Mhm. Was there a point that maybe you're looking at these two as brotherly languages, and was there a point that you kind of got to where you realized that there was something deeper there, or something that indicated history or cultural conflict?
Yeah, I'm embarrassed to say it took a long while. I think it was, in 2014, when there was a revolution in Ukraine, the Revolution of Dignity, when there really became apparent and impossible to ignore this break between what it meant to be Russian and what it meant to be Ukrainian. And that is when, the first time that in my lifetime, I saw Russia invade Ukraine and Russians killing Ukrainians, and so it was this sort of cognitive dissonance, if we're brothers, if these languages are brother languages, why are they killing us? And so that was really the first time it hit me that these languages were not maybe all just sort of innocent and happy and connected in one big family, when the bigger geopolitical events really came to this very, very sad point through which we've had war since 2014, and obviously in 2022 it blew up to a full-scale invasion. And so ever since then, I think this has been something I think about a lot, I struggle with a lot, and that was a real turning point for me.
Yeah. Tell us about that. What's going through your head? What are you feeling? What are you uncovering? How are you coming to this situation?
I think it was a lot of guilt, maybe for not really knowing my history, a lot of confusion. I think that for for me, growing up here in the US, right, I was studying American history, I was learning English. But even my parents who were teaching about my culture, they sent me to Ukrainian school on Saturdays. They kept speaking um our languages here in the US, but they grew up in the Soviet Union. And what I learned is that there's actually a concerted effort across decades in the Soviet Union to erase national identity, right? And create this new narrative that we're all Soviet, we're all the same people. So all the unique nationalities of the 15 different republics in the Soviet Union, that was really tamped down. The languages, the food, the culture, it was all this like monoculture that was created artificially. And so even my parents, I mean, they grew up in that, right? It's like a fish in water. You grow up in it and you don't even realize it. So that's why I think even they weren't able to pass that down to me. So it was really a turbulent time and confusing and emotional. Even now, kind of struggle with growing up, but something that feels like it's part of you. I grew up on old Soviet cartoons and movies. My parents showed them to me. Um, and to say, well, this isn't, I mean, this isn't real. This was something that was created, and it was created specifically to destroy Ukrainian identity,
Mm.
and to try to separate yourself from it. It's almost like cutting off a limb or something, because it's in you. Like my favorite book for the longest time was War and Peace, by Tolstoy, and I haven't read it since the full-scale invasion. I I feel very conflicted about it still. Like what is okay, how do you tease it all apart, and who am I? And what does it mean to read in Russian, to speak Russian? And yeah, I I can't say I've fully figured it out yet.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's so interesting. Like you're like peeling back so much of what you've grown up with, and it's a mentality shift. So that's a lot to grapple with.
Yeah.
And I guess so my question, no, I'm asking, you grew up here, and so when you're growing up here, how much of like Ukrainian identity do you feel that you were able to experience? Because even like you mentioned, growing up or seeing Soviet movies or Soviet cartoons and things like that, were there any things that maybe you can look back now and say, I had this in my home or in my community, and this was distinctly Ukrainian, and maybe I didn't realize it at the time?
Yeah, it's such a great question. I always considered myself Ukrainian, and I don't know. I mean, I think in English now because I've spent most of my adult life here in the United States. But if someone asks me like, what are you? I say I'm Ukrainian. I know my passport is American, but my heart is Ukrainian.
Mhm.
And I think about sort of the deepest, most spiritual aspects of who I am. So my church, I go to a Ukrainian church. Food, also spiritual to me in a way. I'm a big foodie, right? I love Ukrainian food. I cook Ukrainian food. I speak to my children in Ukrainian. Although interestingly, I started with my first child speaking to her in Russian, and then I
Mm,
switched when she was a couple of years old. But
mhm.
so it's the language, it's the religion, it's the food. I mean, the identity is so intangible, right? And
Yeah.
actually, I work now, my nonprofit ENGin. Most of the team is Ukrainian living in Ukraine or very recent refugees due to the war. And that was the first time that I kind of seriously came across this idea that they don't see me as Ukrainian. They referred to me once in a social media post as an American of Ukrainian heritage. And I was like, what now? Excuse me. I don't
Wow.
see myself that way. And talking to them, again, this isn't one that has like a neat answer, but I think for them, it's very much, well, where are you living now? What's in your passport? And they don't see me as like them. In a way, maybe I haven't earned it in their eyes because, I'm not there under the attacks and bombs and drones every night. Um, and I don't know if I if it's unfair to sort of claim that identity, but I've always felt Ukrainian. I wouldn't even say Ukrainian American, even though I guess maybe that's technically more correct. I see myself as Ukrainian, and I think I always will.
Yeah. Wow. That is exactly why identity is so complicated. So you said you did mention that you started speaking in Russian with your first child, and now with your second, you're speaking Ukrainian. What was behind that decision to do that?
So when I had my first kid, I knew I wanted her to be multilingual. My husband is American and we live in America, so I knew she'd be fluent in English. And I know that there are so many benefits of speaking multiple languages, and also I wanted her to be connected to her culture. But when I was choosing between Russian and Ukrainian, because I knew that I by myself couldn't do both with her, right? It's sort of one parent, one language. I thought, well, Russian is more widely spoken and it's going to be more practically useful for her. And my grandparents, my mom's parents are Russian speaking. They were pushing that very hard. And frankly, I knew Russian better at the time because
Mm,
you spend more time talking to your mom generally as a girl. My dad's great. I have a great relationship with him, but just quantitatively speaking, I would say I speak more to my mom. So I, throughout my life, had spoken Russian more. My grandparents that were in my life who had come to the US with us are Russian speaking as well. And so I was just more comfortable with that language. And so I chose Russian. And I think it was around then that I learned that my father had actually grown up speaking Russian. And for me, this was a huge revelation, right? Because again, I thought he spoke Ukrainian, my mom spoke Russian, those were their languages. But he actually was speaking Ukrainian to me just for me to learn that language. And that was a conscious decision on his part. And I was really inspired by that, honestly. That and the fact that he did it so well, even though it wasn't his most comfortable language, he did it so well that I had no idea that his native language was actually Russian until I was an adult. I remember once I heard him speaking Russian and it like broke my brain. I was like, no, Daddy, no, like wrong language. Yeah. So I think his commitment really inspired me to switch, even though it was less comfortable for me. We moved closer to my parents when my little girl was 2 years old, and so I knew I'd have a little more reinforcement. She'd be hearing Ukrainian from my dad as well, so I wouldn't be the only one. And so we switched, and it was hard. It was really, imagine like whoever you speak to in language, right? And your whole relationship with them, you're speaking in one language and then forcing yourself to speak in another one. But but I did it, and now she's 10 and she doesn't really speak or understand Russian. She's completely
mm,
forgotten it, and it feels really unnatural to speak to her in anything but Ukrainian. And in fact, over time, as I've been running ENGin for 5 years, working with a Ukrainian team, and now Ukrainian is easier for me than Russian. So these things that you think are kind of permanent, they're really not. There's this adjustment period. And it's wild for me to look at old videos of me talking to her when she was a baby and speaking in Russian. I'm like, what? Like that just sounds so weird.
Wow. Oh my gosh. What do you, or do you know, what do you think, or do you know about your dad's decision to speak to you in Ukrainian? Like, what was behind that?
I think my dad, when he was in high school and college, is really when he discovered Ukrainian nationalism, right? When he first started learning all these things that I learned much later about the fact that there is a separate Ukrainian history, there is a separate Ukrainian identity, that Ukrainians have been fighting for freedom for hundreds of years. In fact, Ukraine was the first democracy in Europe long before all the Western European countries, and so there is a very rich history going back thousands of years, and then throughout that history, there's always Russia trying to get us down and trying to crush us in its different manifestations, the Soviet Union, Tsarist Russia before that, and Muscovy before that. So it's something my dad learned as a young man, and he was a bit of a revolutionary, and he would go up and like put up posters at night promoting Ukrainian identity and Ukrainian freedom, and got into a little trouble with the KGB. And so I think it was all part of that. It's something that he he told me more and more about as I got older, and I'm really, really proud of him because, as a young man to go against this whole huge system the Soviet bureaucracy, the KGB, and stand up for your beliefs and advocate for a free Ukraine. I mean, that's really special. And I'm very, very glad that I have that in my history. And so I think speaking Ukrainian to me was just another act of defiance, just like the posters he put up saying that, I'm raising a Ukrainian child. It was also very important for him that I go to a Ukrainian speaking school because at the time in Kyiv, they had both. And he actually emigrated first before the rest of our family. He went, to help support the family to work in the US. And he would write to my grandparents and because my mom came with him, and so my grandparents were raising me for some time, and he
Mm.
said definitely enroll her in a Ukrainian speaking school. And they were like, why does she need Ukrainian? It's such a niche and useless language. Russian's the one, but they did it because he was his choice as my father. I think it worked because I am a very patriotic, passionate Ukrainian. I think I'm carrying on my dad's cause of fighting for our identity. And it's just something that took me a while to come to because really growing up, like I said, I just had no idea about the complexity of all of this and that it's not just another language, right? It's just language means so much more than just the practical words that you speak. There's so much behind those
Yeah.
words.
Yeah. Growing up is crazy because there's so many things I look back on and I'm like, I can't believe I ever thought that or I ever felt that way. It's such a trip, right? Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So you came to the US in the 90s, right?
Yeah. Mhm.
And where do you mind if I ask where were you living when you moved to the US? Like what part?
Yeah, we were living outside of New York City. So there's a big immigrant community there, big Ukrainian community. Also, frankly, a broader post-Soviet Russian Jewish community. So yes, so we gravitated there because that's where we knew people. And I spent most of my life living outside of New York City.
When you arrived in New York, what was the language scape like? You have Russian, you have Ukrainian. Were you encountering different forms of these languages and maybe the way that people who had immigrated here before you, was there any
Mhm.
kind of the language had changed from what you grew up speaking and hearing?
Yeah, I really learned about the concept of a diaspora when I had come here, even a couple years after. And it was in our church. We went to Ukrainian church and we met some people who my parents referred to as diaspora Ukrainians. And I was like, what is this? Right. And uh, it was people who had been born in the US. Often their parents or their grandparents had immigrated from Ukraine. And for me, it was really shocking how different their Ukrainian was from our Ukrainian, how it was difficult for me to understand them at times. I'm not saying it was a completely different language, but there would be words that I'd have no idea what they
Mhm.
meant that I'd never heard before. And it's interesting because back then in the mid 90s, like we were the new arrivals with the modern Ukrainian that we brought over, and these diaspora Ukrainians that had been basically using language from the 1930s, maybe even earlier than
Mm.
that sort of evolved maybe a little bit with them, but was more old school and also had a lot of more English words for certain things that were incorporated from them living in an English speaking environment. And then since then, there's been another huge wave of immigration due to the full-scale invasion in 2022. So now we have sort of the diaspora that was here for generations. And then you have people like me who arrived in the 90s. And then you have people who arrived more recently. So now there's sort of at least three, and then there's more nuances there, but at least three big sort of categories of Ukrainian. And the difference between how my friends who are refugees who just came over speak and my friends who are diaspora are speaking, it's wild. It's interesting that for a lot of us coming from places like Kyiv, where there's a mixed linguistic background and people were exposed to both Russian and Ukrainian, we would understand Russian, or, there's some words that come from Russian. A lot of the earlier immigrants came from the western part of Ukraine where they didn't really have exposure to Russian. And so they culturally too, as far as the dishes they eat, and again, some of the words they know, there's that that difference as well, that there is a sort of like a pure background without as much of the Russian influence. So yeah, it's another really complex question. And it's also really interesting. You say, well, which one's the right Ukrainian, because there's definitely some people looking down on others being like, well, their Ukrainian is bad, when it's different.
Tell me some examples of where like words or phrases that you would have heard from some of the people who came in the 30s versus the 90s versus now.
Oh my gosh. So it's as basic as even like family members. I had a friend from the diaspora refer to her teta and her vuiko, and I'm like, I don't know what that means, and it turned out to be aunt and uncle. And I would always say tiote dядя, which are, one word is similar and one is completely different, but they're neither of them is the same. Or like when my kid goes to, both of my kids actually go to Saturday Ukrainian school, they say klasa for class, and we always said class, and or litera for letter, which you see how some of the like English influence are litera, and I would say bukva, which is again totally different word for the same thing. So it kind of pops up randomly, and it's not that you can't understand each other, but I have a friend who's a teacher at the Saturday school, and she said that it had gotten to be quite impossible because you're teaching some kids who have grown up here, several generations, they barely understand Ukrainian. Then you have the ones who just came and they barely understand English. And then you have ones who are kind of in the middle, like me and my kids. And you have to somehow teach almost like three different classes all at once. And so I do think that it has real implications for being able to communicate and be part of one community.
Yeah, that's I love when language does that, when it's like part of the diaspora and the language kind of becomes a time capsule, and the way that they have their words. And it's fun for me to see how this time capsule works. You're getting to see it actually in real time through three distinct generations, and it's really interesting. You said also the food and the dishes are different too because of where people were coming from. Um, I want to talk to you about Ukrainian food later, but I can't because
That could be a whole different podcast.
I love Ukrainian food. And I definitely want to talk to you about that later. But, I guess as you're in community and you are observing so much, there's so much richness that you're seeing, right? Because it's the language, it's the food, it's maybe the way we celebrate holidays or the way we
Yes.
gather and things like that. So that's really fantastic. Upon reflection, do you remember maybe anyone else's in your community that you were in, anyone else whose parents or whose family made that decision to make sure that their kids were speaking Ukrainian and not speaking Russian?
That's that's a great question. I think that there's definitely families I know who've done both ways. I mean, again, we have families from the diaspora that really don't have the Soviet influence, right? And so Russian wasn't even an option for them because their grandparents or great grandparents left before the Soviet Union's influence really made itself felt. So I think that's for them, it's like, well, we speak Ukrainian and it might not be the purest Ukrainian because it's several generations ago, but Russian's not even a choice. And then you definitely have people who had both languages and stuck with Russian because it's simpler. And especially in the case of refugee families, sometimes they think their kids have been through enough going through the war and then they had to learn English, and to try to switch that language as well as feels like a lot. Plus, some of the younger kids are forgetting Russian and just wanting to speak in English,
Mm,
which I think is a typical immigrant thing, right? For any young children.
yeah.
And then I also know others who have switched, really tried to get their kids to speak in Ukrainian as well as learning English when they came over here. So as of 2022. I think when I did it back in 2017, before the full-scale invasion, some families were doing it then, but it was less common because it was still like, well, okay, there's a war, but it's Russia, the country, it's not Russian, the language, it's not the culture that's the problem. It's just, these bad Russians that are making these bad choices now. And I don't think there was as much of an awareness. Well, actually, Russian culture is built on colonization and subjugation. And so it is the language, it is the culture. It's not just bad Putin today or bad Russians today. It's like the whole Russian identity is built on pushing others down. And so it is problematic, and you need to sort of extricate yourself from that. So yes, I would say I know more people who have done that now, but it was less common back in the day, and I think that makes it harder, right? Because the longer you speak in the language or your kids get older, making that switch is a lot harder.
Yeah. Tell us about ENGin and the start of it and what kind of led to you wanting to start this initiative.
So ENGin's really based on the power of language, but the language we focus on is English. And the big idea is that English opens doors. And I got the idea when I was working with some Ukrainian teenagers as a mentor and really trying to give back. It was after the revolution of 2014, and I was looking for ways to get involved and use my skills to help young Ukrainians. And I realized that speaking English opens up so many academic and professional opportunities. Getting the best education, getting the best jobs, even for Ukrainians in Ukraine, a lot of the great jobs you need to speak English, right? Because you're working for multinational companies, you're working for international clients. And I learned that there really wasn't an opportunity to learn to speak. So most Ukrainians are studying English in school, but much like here in the US, you might study French or Spanish, but you're not actually going to be able to talk. You'll memorize all the grammar, you'll do your vocabulary list, but then you have to communicate and you freeze up, right? It's the same thing there with English. They learn all the tenses, right? And it's a very much memorization, rote learning, and there's no opportunities to speak. There's no one to speak to. And so you end up with situations like my mentee Olena, who inspired ENGin. She had studied English for 10 years, and when we got on our first Zoom call, she couldn't talk to me.
Mm.
And I was just shocked because in writing she could write, she could read, but she couldn't speak. So ENGin really tries to help unlock the language barrier for Ukrainians in a very authentic conversational setting by connecting them one-on-one with English speaking volunteers all around the world. And they chat for just 1 hour a week, but it really makes a huge difference because it's that one-on-one context where you can't hide, you have to talk, plus you're participating in cultural exchange, you're sharing your culture and learning about your conversation partner's culture. And oftentimes you form a really close bond, and there's that emotional support aspect of it as well. So it's a very cool program. It was going to be a small side project. It's now my full-time job. We have a team of almost 40 people, and I can't believe, it's grown so much. But I think it's very much grows out of my lifelong passion for languages. I didn't know this is what I would end up doing with my career, but I've always been passionate about language and really thought about the power of language. And I'm very excited that I get to do this as my job now.
Yeah, that's so exciting. And you're opening so many doors for people, and that's really beautiful. How do you see this opportunity for them being able to take the focus away from Russia and the Russian language and the Russian culture?
Yeah, I think it's something that, again, the roots of it can trace back to 2014 before ENGin existed, right? The revolution happened because the Russian aligned president had tried to sever ties between Ukraine and the European Union and the West and realign with Russia, and Ukrainians didn't want that. And so really it's been a battle ever since then, like a literal and figurative battle, to say we are a Western European democracy and we want to align with Europe. We do not want to be Russia's little brother. And Russia doesn't like that, right? And there's many fronts to fight that battle on. There's many ways to fight it. And I think language is a key part of that. And it really hit home for me when I was talking to a mom who was a student in ENGin, and she was signing her son up for ENGin as well. And she said, well, if his second language is going to be English, that means it's not going to be Russian, right? So in terms of the media that he's consuming, in terms of the conversations he's having, it really is a very direct line between studying English and replacing that second language after Ukrainian, which naturally would have been Russian for a long time for most Ukrainians if you're going to have a second language. And now it's English. And I'm really proud to be part of that movement because English is the language that connects you to the world, right? It's the language that gives you options to talk to anyone you want to talk to pursue any path you want to pursue. And I think it's the language of the future, right?
Hmm.
Whereas Russian is the language of sort of let's revive the old Soviet past, which our grandparents miss, and that's because it's it's hard. You're 85 and you remember your nostalgia. That's a whole other complexity. But the language of youth, the language of the future, well, that's Ukrainian, and then that's English, and that's what I want to contribute towards.
Yeah, yeah, that's very positive and very, hopeful for a positive future for Ukrainian youth.
We're trying. It's hard to be positive during such a hard time. But what's interesting is when the full-scale invasion broke out, ENGin was about 2 years old, and I was thinking, well, we should stop this, right? Because there's a horrible war and people are being murdered in their sleep. And as they walk around their business, it's really the time to, study English. And the very strong message from our students and our team in Ukraine was yes, because this is exactly what Russia wants for us to stop living, stop dreaming, stop thinking about the future. And this is how we defy the attempts to kill us. And so it is, it's a decision to stay positive and to focus on the future and the growth and personal development and all of these good things rather than getting drawn into the sort of depression and doing nothing because there's a war. So it's a very, I think, intentional choice by our Ukrainian team and by all the Ukrainians who joined the program.
Yeah. Tell us about some of the Ukrainians who have joined the program and what some of their motivations are, what some of their feelings are for working with ENGin and how they feel about it and how they have been able to grow and thrive through the language.
I think the people that join ENGin, they're very, very different if you're looking at ages, demographics, where they're from, their stories, but they're all united by a curiosity about the bigger world and a desire to grow and reach higher, whatever that looks like for any individual. And I think it's really exciting for them to open up their worlds by talking every week to someone in a different country. We have volunteers in like over 140 countries around the world. So really it can be anywhere and discover a new culture to get confident speaking in English, which then opens up the doors to maybe a new job or a promotion, maybe a study abroad program or a bachelor's or master's program in a different country. Maybe it's an opportunity to present an international conference, as we have a number of students who are representing their employers, or we have someone who's a mayor who represents his town at international conferences, or people participate in international diplomatic initiatives as young ambassadors of Ukraine in Europe, across Europe, in the US, and so it's a way to connect to the world and it's a way to share our culture and our language as well. So this is something that's also very exciting for our students who are patriotic Ukrainians, and they're very, very excited to become ambassadors of Ukrainian culture and the Ukrainian language. And in fact, we create a little side program for our volunteers to learn Ukrainian because we saw how much of the exchange was sort of happening in two ways, where not only were the volunteers helping are Ukrainians with English and sharing their cultures, but Ukrainians were sharing Ukrainian culture and teaching our volunteers a few words in Ukrainian. And so we've sort of made it official and we have online Ukrainian lessons now as well. So it's very exciting to sort of see this mutually beneficial exchange really going in two directions. That's one of the things I love most about the program.
Yeah, that's so exciting. And I think it's also valuable because we're all seeing headlines around the world of this invasion that's happening in Ukraine and how Ukrainians are fighting so hard for their independence. And I think that it's very easy to look at the news or to read the news and you see one narrative, but it's very different when you can actually speak to someone or a group of people who are in the country day to day,
Yeah.
doing the work, living the life. And I think it's hopefully part of creating a separate narrative and maybe something that's not pictured in mainstream media.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that, if everyone volunteered for ENGin, I don't think there would still be a war because, people would understand. And it's very easy to manipulate people's opinions when they don't really know about something. And the one thing about engine volunteers is that, you can't really manipulate them because they know what's really going on, right? They don't need the news because they hear it from the people who are actually living it. So I do think that's something that's another really important aspect of our work. And I'm really proud to be able to contribute to that. I think this is something I've mentioned before where you read horrible things in the news about anywhere across the world. And like, what can you do? Maybe you can send a donation, but then, you haven't stopped it and still doesn't feel good. But here with ENGin, you can spend an hour a week talking to someone and you can benefit so much and you can actually change someone's life, in a very flexible way from the comfort of home. And that helplessness that you feel reading the news it goes away because you're actually doing something. And I've never encountered an opportunity like that before, and I'm one who reads the news maybe too much, and I'm very empathetic, and I just feel so sad about everyone suffering all around the world. And being able to actually do something about it, at least here with my country, through our program, is is a blessing. And I think learning Ukrainian is another thing that people can do, and that's a bigger lift, right? I mean, anyone can volunteer practicing English for an hour a week. We're very, very, very much of a big tent. We say anyone can volunteer for ENGin as long as you speak English. Learning Ukrainian is kind of next level. We know it's not for everyone. It's a whole different alphabet, right? But their language really is beautiful. It's very special. We have some hilarious sayings. The reading is easy once you get the new alphabet. It's actually not like English, where I'm trying to teach my little one to read in English. She's 5. I was like, I don't know how to explain this. In Ukrainian, like the letters you see are the letters you read, and they're always the same. So it's complicated, but not that complicated. So we've had, I think, over 100 learners who have no connection to Ukraine, who are coming to study Ukrainian just as a way to support Ukraine. And that's really exciting as well, to give people that option to support and to make a difference.
Yeah, that's really beautiful. I love hearing that Ukrainian is simple once you get the alphabet.
Yeah, I really, I mean, maybe I'm biased, but I really feel it is. And the way that, like, we have our teachers, they really do it in a very conversation-based way with a lot of cultural fun facts, and really trying to do it not the traditional way with the memorizing the grammar and not being able to speak. And I think that makes all the difference too. I think in general with language learning, right, we're learning a lot about how to do it right and how not to do it. So I think in general, learning languages now is maybe easier than it was years ago because it's more conversational and more relevant to real world interactions.
Yeah, we didn't even have an opportunity to have conversations like back then, unless well, like you were in Ukrainian school. Did you have opportunity to converse, or were you just like learning grammar and rules and things like that?
Well, that's a great question. So Ukrainian school is interesting because in theory, you're speaking Ukrainian with your parents at home. And so that's a Ukrainian school is where you go to learn to read and write. So you do want to have that focus. But yes, absolutely. It's also for the speaking piece because you want to see, well, Ukrainian isn't just like the born language that I speak to mom and dad. Like there are other kids that I can speak this language to. And yes, it does try to make it more alive for kids, because like any kids of immigrants, right, English is always going to be the default. That I think that overrides most of the trends that we've been talking about, and all this thing about identity and patriotism. I mean, like if I'm 10 years old and I want to speak a language, and it's going to be English because that's what I hear in school and that's what I see on the TV. And going to cultural school, which actually I'm very lucky to live in a very diverse area. And so my daughters have friends of all cultural backgrounds, and a lot of them go to, French school and Korean school, or all of these different Saturday or Sunday schools where they get the kids in touch with their heritage. And part of it is the grammar and the writing and the reading. And part of it is like, well, let's just talk with other kids who speak this language so it comes alive for you, and you're motivated to learn it.
Hmm. So with ENGin, do you have anybody who comes to you, like, are there any Ukrainians who come with zero English and they have an opportunity to just speak? Or are there any teachers who are teaching them reading and writing and kind of language structure like that?
We're focused on conversation for
Okay.
now, and that means that people need to have a basic level of English to start. But we do have volunteers who are Ukrainian either living in Ukraine or who have left Ukraine, and so they speak Ukrainian, and they work with our very beginners to help get them to a level where they can speak to someone like you who would know no Ukrainian. And that's really powerful for me also because we get our graduates of the program to come back as volunteers. We really encourage them to do it. So they benefit from ENGin, they become fluent, and then they can go work with a beginner and help improve their English. And I just, it makes me really happy because it's like this virtuous cycle, right? You're helping people and they're helping others and just kind of growing and growing. And before we couldn't even really work with beginners because we didn't have bilingual volunteers. And now we have a growing base of bilingual volunteers. So as long as someone has a little bit of English, we can take them and pull them in. Actually, my 10-year-old just started as a volunteer. She works with a little 7-year-old in Sumy, Ukraine, and it's the most adorable thing. I can't tell you how cute it is. And the little girl, she knows a little bit of words. She can't really talk, but they have their sessions, for 30 minutes, so it's not overwhelming, and they practice different words. And I can see the little girl already, kind of the things that they do every week. She's getting more comfortable talking, like, let's talk about the weather, like, tell me how you're doing today. What did you eat for breakfast? My kid always asks, what did you eat for breakfast? Key questions. So yes, we can really help people who know even a little bit.
I love that. Okay. I need to know how can our listeners, how can all of us listening to our conversation, how can we get involved? How can we volunteer? How can we work with ENGin to help Ukrainians learn English?
Well, we would love to welcome anyone who would be interested. Like I said, as long as you have an internet connection and 1 hour a week and you can speak English, you don't have to be a native speaker. I just want to say that 60% of our volunteers are native speakers and 40% are not. So we're very, very open to everyone. I would encourage everyone to check out our website, www.enginprogram.org, and that's ENGIN program.org. And we are open 365 days a year, so you can apply anytime. And we are growing every week. Every week we have a couple hundred of people who apply, and we're looking for a volunteer for each and every one of them. So would be really, really grateful to see some of your listeners sign up, or if it's not the right time, to spread the word to other English speakers in your life. Because as a small new nonprofit, and I know, I mean, it sounds like, well, 50,000 people were really big, but really it's just me and my team working out of our houses, and we're very grassroots, and we very much depend on regular people to volunteer and to spread the word and to help us grow.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. I'm gonna sign up.
Yes, we would love to have you. I think you would be, especially with your expertise in languages and your love of languages, I think you would be perfect for this.
I'm gonna definitely sign up, but I'm also going to put the link in the show notes for this episode so that our listeners can click and sign up and help Ukrainians learn English right away.
Thank you.
This is really exciting and really inspiring, all the work that you're doing. And it's really, really a beautiful thing to see in this world right now that has so much ugliness. It's nice to see that somebody's doing good work and really looking forward to and happy about helping people. I want to ask you, what does being Ukrainian mean to you today? And how has that meaning shifted for you maybe in the last 5 years? We know what's going on, but you talked a bit about how your identity and how you've felt has shifted over time. But today, what does being Ukrainian mean to you?
I think the biggest shift has been from seeing being Ukrainian as something that I am and was born with, to something that I choose and I do every day. So for me, being Ukrainian today means doing my part to fight for my country's freedom and to make the choice every day to help others, to help build our nation, to believe in Ukraine's future, and to stay optimistic during a very difficult time. And I think it's really empowering to see it as sort of a choice that I make, to be part of a community of people who are fighting against insurmountable odds for their freedom and for their right to be Ukrainian, to speak Ukrainian, to not be taken over by Russia. And I'm just very, very lucky that I have this heritage and that I have the chance to use my skills to contribute to my motherland's future.
Yeah. What are your hopes for the future generation of Ukrainians who are coming up now in amidst conflict and who are fighting and who are very, I hate this word, resilient.
Yeah,
I hate the word resilient. I just
no.
think like people want to say it's not a compliment. I'm
It's
sorry.
not a compliment. Yeah, we also say unbreakable, but it's like we're humans. Like you shouldn't have to be unbreakable. Yeah, you should have like the room to break.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So I don't want to use that word resilient, but what do you hope for them, for the young ones, for the next generation who are coming up now amid conflict? What are you excited about for their future?
I really do think the Ukrainian language has seen a resurgence from my generation, and I see that the young people, even those coming from Russian areas, speak great Ukrainian and better Ukrainian than I do. And I think they've sort of woken up from this Soviet stupor. They don't have that legacy. They're not tied to it like I am. They didn't grow up on it. And so for them, they are more purely Ukrainian. They don't have to like cut off the a limb, right? Where I grapple with my love of Soviet food and Soviet movies and Russian books and ha have to sort of go through that. The younger generation, they grew up, they were born in independent Ukraine, right? I was born in the Soviet Union. My team, it's a very young, energetic team of Ukrainians. All of them were born in a free Ukraine. And so that really it really fills me with hope for the future because the new generation is Ukrainian and is very much aware of their identity and how that freedom to be Ukrainian is bought in blood. And look, I don't want to be idealistic. It's not like, everyone's there, working for nonprofits or fighting in the front or doing good things. I mean, yes, there are a lot of people you know, who are posting on Instagram and sort of more focused on materialistic things. And there's people who don't see a problem with speaking Russian and don't grapple with it. We're people like anyone else, right? Ukrainians are people tend to idealize Ukrainians in the news and it's there's good people and there's bad people. But overall, there's a lot of really, really inspiring, dedicated young Ukrainians and really that's I think what is going to get us through it and going to get us through the war because there's just so much energy there that I don't think existed, a generation or two generations ago.
Yeah, yeah. I hope for that. I hope for that. Um, I don't like to talk about these things on the podcast, but I know that they're necessary and I stand with everyone who's oppressed because no one should have to go through that. It's
Yeah. It's interesting because, some people say like, oh, why do things have to get political? But like, where's the line between politics and life, right? Like for me, it's always surprising when people talk about the war in Ukraine as politics because I mean, for me, it's not. It's my friends and colleagues and students who are suffering. Like I, I don't know, it's like that they can't sleep and they're scared of dying. Like, how is that politics? Like, why can't people just like live and work and get married and have babies without being bombed and being killed? Like it doesn't make any sense. And when you read about on the news, it's yeah, I don't know. I don't understand how this world works sometimes, but
yeah.
I guess we just do our part and we do what we can. I say we create little islands of good in the chaos, and that's what I'm
Mm,
trying to.
yeah, that's a really good phrase to focus on. Little islands of good. Um, can we talk about food?
Yes, let's do it. On a happier note.
Ukrainian food. Okay, so you were born in Kyiv, and I know that Ukraine is huge, and there's regional differences and regional cultural differences, and I'm sure that extends to food. So I'd love to hear some of your favorite dishes, what you grew up with, or what you loved that your mom would cook or your dad would cook or your grandparents. What are some things you crave? Can't live without.
Oh my gosh. Obviously borscht. It's you can't talk about Ukrainian food without borscht. And there's many different borscht recipes. And I was an adult when I realized you could make it with meat. I was like, what? No, the vegetarian borscht is the purest borscht.
Hmm.
So I like a really light a vegetarian borscht. And also, the cultural complexity here, I can't not say it because what I grew up on, some of it were Soviet dishes that I only recently like. Have you heard of Olivier, salad Olivier?
No.
It's so it is interestingly, and they have it in Spanish as well, and they call it ensalada rusa or Russian salad. And now we're calling it ensalada ucraniana in solidarity, Ukrainian salad. And it is a salad that was made by a French chef for one of the czars of Russia several hundred years ago, and it's cut up meat and you have different vegetables and all kind of with mayonnaise, and so it's like a cold salad. It's kind of like potato salad but so much better. It's I don't really like American potato salad, but it's like a much better version of that. So I grew up eating this olivia, and literally a couple of months ago I learned that that was like a Soviet dish that was pushed on all of us because it was cheap to make, and the salad wasn't even the original recipe that the French chef had come up with hundreds of years ago. They made like a really cheap version with like with like basically like the Russian version of bologna
No
and lots of
way.
potatoes because they were cheap, and basically and they wanted to feed the proletariat. All the workers needed to eat quickly and cheaply and go back to the factories and like do their 5-year plans. And now I'm like I was like again my favorite food, now that's been ruined for me too because it has this legacy. So yeah, so I used to really like this salad olivia, and now I'm kind of mixed on it. The blini, which are crepes, again, kind of mixed. They also have them in Russia, and then there's like mlintsy, like Ukrainian crepes, but they're unlike the American pancakes, which are kind of thick and good in their own way. These are more like French crepes, really, really good. And we have sir, which is the word for cheese, but it's kind of like a farmer's cheese. That's a
Mhm.
very Ukrainian thing that I guess the Amish also have it, but it's a traditional Ukrainian cheese, and you can put it as a filling for the crepe. So that's really, really good. Sirniki, which are actual like little fried pancakes made from the sir, from the farmer's cheese. They're incredible, and I could eat them all day, but I really shouldn't because Ukrainian food is not healthy. And there's just so much more to discover, things that I haven't grown up with. So actually, I got a couple Ukrainian cookbooks recently, and I'm cooking these dishes that I hadn't been familiar with before, traditional ones that people are like digging up from culinary history and resurrecting. And I really love it. I really love trying new things and learning about the history of what I eat, which before I just kind of ate food and was like, okay, it tastes good or it doesn't taste good. And I'm like, well, where did this come from? And it's been like a whole journey. Like I said, this could be a whole other podcast about, food and culinary history and how we eat what we eat, why we eat what we eat, like who made those decisions for us.
Mhm.
Like this is I think what really struck me is that what we think, we're eating, like we're making those choices, but there are bigger systems. Frankly, here in the United States, and you think about what we eat, there are bigger systems, deciding what most of us eat and who makes money on that. And that's another way to resist another kind of revolution by choosing to
Yeah.
eat differently.
Yeah, absolutely. I am starving now that you mentioned
Yeah,
all
me
those
too.
foods.
I have a late lunch after this.
I love my favorite, and I haven't had it in a long time, and I'm blanking on the name, but it's the cabbage leaf that's with,
Holubtsi,
oh
yes.
my
I didn't mention them
God.
because when people think about Ukrainian cooking, they think about Anakin, they think holubtsi, and those are very authentic and very, very, very good. But something that, if your listeners are gonna go away with some knowledge about Ukrainian foods, like yes, we have amazing borscht and varenik and holubtsi, but then there's so much more to Ukrainian food. So go explore, man.
Yes, yes. I'm really looking forward to exploring more. But when you go to the restaurant and you like, you haven't had halupsi in a long time. It's like,
Yes. Yeah,
I
you
just
you live
need
in New York
it.
City, right? So Veselka is amazing, and I always, when I'm in the area, I love to eat there. But my mom and grandma are not very much into cooking, unfortunately. They're
Okay.
this is one thing that they just didn't really enjoy it. And so they taught me the basics, but really for me, discovering our food and our culinary history has been more of something I've done as an adult, and also going to restaurants. We have a Ukrainian restaurant that opened in Washington, D.C., where I live, and it's really, really exciting to see our cuisine sort of coming back here in the United States. Lviv, the big city in the West, is really famous for amazing pastries, and there's actually a Lviv style bakery owned by Ukrainians that just opened in Atlanta, where one of my coworkers is. And it's like the fact that, you're seeing Ukrainian restaurants and cafes popping up more, really, it's really exciting and gives more of an opportunity for people to discover our cuisine.
Yeah, absolutely. Growing up, I didn't have a lot of my cultural dishes either. Like my mom just kind of taught me the basics, but like, my family's from the Caribbean, so there were things that
Mm.
I'm learning on my own now, just buying cookbooks and looking at YouTube videos and researching recipes and things like that. So it's really interesting to have that kind of dynamic of maybe you have friends whose parents or grandparents kind of kept them in the kitchen to make sure
Mhm.
they passed down these recipes and taught them. And then, coming to it as an adult, like I have been trying for years to replicate one of my grandmother's rice dishes. And I've
Oh, wow.
probably cooked it 2 dozen times since 2020. And I think I got it right like once. And I don't, when I cook, I just like throw stuff in. So I wasn't really writing down how much of this I used and that I used. But it's a journey on its own, even trying to reconnect with that culinary history, which does carry memory and feeling just as much as language does.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. What does it mean to be Ukrainian? Speaking of identity, part of the story I grew up with is that Ukrainian women are great cooks and they know how to cook everything. And I have some of my friends now who are like that and they cook without recipes and everything. And I'm not like that. And to me, it feels like another sort of like, well, am I really Ukrainian if I can't cook the food, and are these expectations, which are frankly sometimes like very gendered and not right. Like I had a nanny from Ukraine who was helping me for a few months, and she would always cook all this great stuff for the kids and then for my husband. And I said, "Where's mine?" And she said, "No, you don't get any. Like we cook, we don't eat. We just grab something while we're standing, frying these linse, the sipniki, the little pancakes or the crepes. Like we'll maybe grab one, but like we don't sit down and eat. Like it's for the kids and for the husband. So I don't know how I feel about that. It's a it's a whole can of worms there.
That's a different point of view.
But you know what, with the younger generation, when I ask them, like they don't have this. They're very, they're free to like if I don't want to cook, like, some of them they don't cook and that doesn't make them any less Ukrainian or any less women. So I do think that again, there's hope in the future in the younger generations for sort of more inclusive and more positive way of seeing our identity.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Well, I've been really happy to talk with you in this conversation, learn more about ENGin and learn more about your history. And I just want to say thank you so much for making the time to chat on this podcast with me.
Thank you for having me. It's been fun.
I like to end each episode on the same question. Just have some fun before we go. Do you have any jokes, popular sayings, tongue twisters, cool slang words, idioms, words of wisdom, or words of advice in Ukrainian to share and to teach us?
Oh my gosh. So many. Like I said, we have some hilarious sayings in Ukrainians, very tongue-in-cheek, kind of sarcastic language and culture. One of my favorites is яйця курку вчить, which means the egg is trying to teach the hen. So when it's like you say it, or I guess I usually it was said to me when I was, being like a little too much of a know-it-all with my elders, say, oh, the egg's trying to teach the hen again. Um, or one that my mom would say a lot to me, you'd be like, oh, mom, do you love me? As a kid, it's like, yeah, I love you when you're sleeping with your face to the wall.
Oh,
All sounded like, in love and that's it's yeah. And now I say that to my kids sometimes. They think it's really funny. Yeah. So a lot of there's also food ones. There's like little like curses like ashoptiskis, which means may you turn sour. So yeah. So yeah, there's I would encourage everyone, even if you don't get to studying Ukrainian, which is a project, look up some Ukrainian idioms and sayings, and they're really funny.
in what context would you tell someone that you hope that they turn sour?
if they're being really mean or annoying or bothering you, you kind of want them to to stop stop being mean to you. So you wouldn't lead with that. It would be only in response to some negative negative comments from them.
Okay. Can you teach me that one?
So you feel like that's going to be a useful one, yeah.
You never know.
Like щоб ти скис. You
A
let it go south.
shob de
Ти-
skis.
Yeah.
A shob
You have
de
good
skis.
pronunciation.
Really?
Yeah, and there's a lot of people I mean Ukrainian pronunciation is quite different, so it can be a challenge, but yes, you sound very natural.
Oh, it must be all the halupsi.
There
I'm
you go.
teasing.
Yes.
I'm teasing. A shob de skis.
Yes.
Okay. Thank
You
you.
need to go tell that to a Ukrainian now, and they will be amazed.
Well, I want to make friends before I make enemies, but you never know. This is New York City. I got to defend myself too. So, yeah.
If you meet any mean Ukrainians, now you will know
Exactly.
what to tell them.
Never know who I'll encounter on the subway. So, I have to be prepared. Katerina, thank you so much for this conversation. Before I let you go, really quickly, in Ukrainian, if you've been having a conversation with someone for quite a while, but you're now about to go your separate ways, what would be the best way to say goodbye?
До побачення. Until we see each other again.
До побачення.
До побачення, El.
До побачення. Katerina, thank you so much, and I'll be talking to you soon. Bye.
Bye.
New episodes of Speaking Tongues are available every Monday, 7 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and to like and share episodes with other language lovers like yourselves.